Hello, this is Donald Philip Beach from Jacksonville, North Carolina, doing the Principles of Theology, an introduction to the 39 articles by Professor W.H. Griffith Thomas, formerly the principal of Wycliffe Hall at Oxford, and later in the United States, professor of systematic theology at Wycliffe College, University of Toronto, just across the street from Knox College, where my dad spent a few years with the Presbyterians. This has got an introduction. Of all things, this was published by the Philadelphia Theological Seminary of the Reformed Episcopal Church in 1996. I remember when it came out. It was first published in 1930. It has got a history of editions. Interesting. They also have a preface by Dr. James Innes Packer, and that preface is published by permission. And I don't think we're violating copyright, in fact, copyright whatever, because we're basically selling a book. I don't know if they still sell that or not. I would have to check. Anyways, I'm doing the preface here by Dr. James Innes Packer. Of course, I'm going to be looking for a number of things as we go through here. The biblicality, systematics, church history, exegesis. I'm also going to be looking as a Westminster man for sensitivities to Reformed theology. Professor Thomas, W.H. Thomas, I'll just call him W.H.G.T. maybe, I don't know. Was a premillennialist, was slated to be the first systematician at Dallas Seminary in 1924, but he died in the summer. And as a result, Louis Sperry Chafer took over for the next 30 years and became the systematician. But Prof. Thomas was working out of Philadelphia, wondering what he knew about the Reformed Episcopalians. It would be a historical question, but he did a lot of traveling and speaking around, and he was up at the University of Toronto. And I wonder if my father's Anglican chaplain in the Royal Canadian Navy read this book. My father just loved that Anglican chaplain. And after World War II, traveled around with his Anglican chaplain to different churches who wanted to hear Canadian veterans. My dad was a layman at the time. But the Anglican chaplain, forget his name now. I'm not even sure my dad told me his name, now that I think about it. As for Thomas, W.H. Griffith Thomas, we were up at Wycliffe here a few years back in Toronto and got his picture. It's hanging over on the wall over there. It's still on the wall, a picture of Prof. Thomas at Wycliffe. A school founded to counter the Tractarians in the mid-19th century. Founded in 1877, I think, downtown Toronto. Professor Roland Harris, Prof. Roland Harrison, Old Testament man, taught at Wycliffe for years. He's just buried up the road from University of Toronto. And so anyways, we'll start with Dr. Packer, whom I love, whom I noted in an earlier video, capitulated to the evangelical Catholic. He knew better. Instead of having a united witness against the Council of Trent that was being snuck in under the radar screen, were justified by faith without the word alone. And he, of all people, he knew. Trying to be a nice guy. The culture of niceness. Thou shalt not offend is the 11th commandment of the evangelicals. Thou shalt not offend by being offensive. Well, we don't want to be offensive needlessly or impolitely, but we do need to confront things. And Jim did not do that with ECT. And that is just, he lost a lot of friends over it, and I'm one of them. That does not invalidate the rest of his work or his theology or him as a brother. He's a brother in Christ. He just erred and strayed like a lost sheep, trusting too much in the devices and desires of his own hearts and having offended against God's law by selling out on justification by faith alone. He sought affirmation. Totally unacceptable, Jim. And you're memorialized here in this library at Princeton Academy for having done that. To make it worse, you failed to repent. You continued to defend your indefensible position. You became hard of heart. Unacceptable, Jim. We pray that you would publish a retraction as a public figure whom we love and you've influenced so many of us. And so we'll read from Jim's preface to the 39 articles with some issues that will intersperse reading between the lines, various interlocutions and glosses as we go. Again, this is systematic theology. Here's Jim on Thomas. Welch by extraction, scholarly by inclination, hard-working by disposition, evangelical by conversion. Is there any other way? Come on, Jim. An Anglican by conviction. William Henry Griffith Thomas, 1861 to 1924. Contemporary of my great-grandparents on both sides. Was a Christian minister of outstanding abilities. And by the way, I'll insert here Thomas's work, catechetical manual called The Catholic Faith, is a must-read by everybody. Romanists, you'll see what Anglicans believe. Presbyterians, you learn about Anglican catechesis in that book. Tremendous volume by Prof. W.H. Griffith Thomas. It's down in here somewhere over here. Called The Catholic Faith. Not Roman Catholic, but Protestant and Reformed faith. And I think we'll see here when he comes to Article 17, there's no dilly-dallying around by the Prof on predestination. All that silly, goofy talk we get with the Arminians, including in the ACNA. And the libos, pisky libos, I don't think they want to go near that. Although my church, they allowed us, a couple of us, to teach Romans, and we went through Romans 9 to 11. Those people were very receptive, scholarly type people, educated, and a lot of doctors, a couple of judges, lots of lawyers. So they're used to thinking. They were not put off. They listened. And, has to be a place for those people too. After fruitful parish ministry in St. Aldate's, Oxford, it would be nice to look that church up, and St. Paul's, Portman Square, London, he became principal of Wycliffe Hall, Oxford, and then moved to Canada as professor of Old Testament. Oh, that's new. Well, so he he knows Hebrew, and later systematic theology, in addition at Wycliffe College at Toronto. Beautiful college. I got some pictures here in file. I went in there, and it was summer, and the receptionist was there, and I said, "Well, they've got across the street Holy Trinity Anglican or Holy Trinity College. It's a Anglican college." I said, "What's different?" And I kind of had a sense of it, but I want to see how she answered it. What's the difference between Wycliffe and Trinity? Holy Trinity across the street. She said, "Well, they want for students, so they all come over here to Wycliffe. Wycliffe is doing well." I think Ephraim Reeder is up there, Radner. Saw Dr. Radner here a few years back in the conference. And told him what my dad said about Anglicans. Oh, they got some good scholars. And Dr. Radner said, "Yeah, they got some bad ones too." It was fun. Then my grandson, who was with me at the conference, he was on these roller skates. He rolls up right into the middle of the conference between Dr. Radner and I. I said, Pete, So Dr. Radner was polite, turned to my grandson, started talking with him. Things that happen at conferences. Sometimes the best things happen after this guy spoke on around the hallway. Whatever. Anyways, back to Packer on Thomas. His clear and well-stocked mind and his plain-pointed, thrustful way with words. Sounds like Bishop Latimer, huh? So businesslike, economical, and unsentimental brought him widespread acceptance as an author. Bible teacher and theological instructor on both sides of the Atlantic. All his published works reveals him as a dedicated professional of enormous industry and competence. In 1919, he moved to Philadelphia and for 5 years fulfilled a peripatetic ministry throughout North America. He had agreed to teach systematic theology as a visiting professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, which was founded in 1924, but he died suddenly, still at the height of his powers, before the seminary opened its doors. He left the manuscript Principles of Theology complete, which we have here, and which we're reading, and in 1930 it was published in London, with commendatory prefaces by Dr. Dyson Haig of Wycliffe College. And Dyson Haig's got some good stuff too. I got some of his stuff up in here. And Dr. T.W. Gilbert, formerly principal of St. John's Hall, Highbury. I'm not sure where that is. What they said is worth recalling. Quote, the late Dr. Griffith Thomas, wrote Canon Haig, was remarkable as a teacher and leader. His outstanding characteristic was clearness and forcefulness. He had the power of presenting every subject, whether with the pen or with the voice, with a singular conciseness of order and method. From his early days in King's College, London, and Christ's Church, Oxford, he lived a life of the most strenuous activity and was ever a prodigious toiler. Quote, this massive work was the harvest of many years of the widest reading and profoundest thinking. In fact, it is almost an Anglican encyclopedia, a volume not so much for reading from cover to cover, but as a book of reference, treating in the ablest manner those great principles of Christian dogmatics that must occupy the thought and reading of all earnest churchmen. Quote, Dr. Thomas's writings made his name well known to the Christian public, and the influences of his works, such as the Catholic faith, I alluded to that a little earlier, it's a tremendous volume. You really got to have it, no matter what your denominational stripe. And the work of the ministry has been far-reaching, declared Dr. Gilbert. But it is no exaggeration to say that all his earlier work will be surpassed by the volume, which is now published. Half a century later, it is apparent that these were just estimates. Thomas's volume has been in print, selling steadily throughout the period. It has become the regular textbook on the articles, the 39 articles of the Church of England, which apparently, so it's claimed, Church of England's men still have to subscribe to. So it's claimed. I don't know. Regular textbook on the articles in evangelical Anglican theological colleges. Again, I always stumble over the word evangelical, and it gets used all the time. The prayer book is evangelical. 39 articles, evangelical. Whatever. You can illuminate me if you have further insights on that. But I always stumble when I see that. Morning prayer, evening prayer, Holy Communion, it's evangelical. Calls men from death to life, from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of his dear Son in Colossians 1:13. Confession of sin, assurance, pardon, every day, 365, 24/7. And it holds its place as the most thorough historical exposition of the Anglican confessional basis that has yet to be produced. As such, it stands by merit, alongside Hardwick's history of the articles. He's up in there somewhere. Itself now more than a century old. But with books of this quality, age does not matter. We like that by Dr. Packer here. Age on a book doesn't matter. Great. Thank you, Dr. Packer. They do not date. They might be forgotten, neglected, ignored. As a fact, both of these have been in recent years. They are not, however, superseded. For a job well done and thoroughly done does not need to be done again. Not that these two books are identical in character. Hardwick, goaded by Newman's sleight of hand with the articles, offers specialist research. Thomas's 250,000 terse words expressing exact thought at maximum compression. That's almost like Dr. Packer. I mean, he is succinct at times. Boy, inside that succinctness is compression of a lot of ideas and reading. Jim Packer's book of the 39 articles is explosive in terms of being compact and compressed. And that's a volume worth having too. Constituted a textbook, an organized compendium of the biblical and theological material culled from almost 4 centuries of English writing, aiming to display and vindicate as true, quote unquote, the essential Anglican doctrine. Thomas's statements of purpose in his original preface make this clear. Quote, "It is believed that there is room for another presentation of Anglican doctrine as embodied in the articles. In the preparation of it, all the important works from Rogers," that's an important volume to have, Rogers on the 39 articles, got that over in there somewhere. "Rogers down to modern days have been carefully considered and their vital points discussed as far as possible. The effort has been made to look at the articles in the light of the historical circumstances." Thank you. We interpret historical documents in their historical context, not by 19th century hermeneutic or 20th century hermeneutic. We go back to the 16th century in which the articles were written, and we use that hermeneutic to understand it. Like it or not like it isn't the issue. The issue is a proper hermeneutical approach to a historical document. We do the same in biblical, Old Testament, New Testament exegesis. I can't stress that enough. Because you think of these tractile termites who read the 39 articles from Henry Newman's slates of hand. They still do that. Tires when I see some of that stuff go on. I want to spare the listener, theological students whom I'm talking with, some former military guys. May not have these books, but get some interaction from the old guy. Anyways, back to Dr. Thomas. In the light of historical circumstances gave rise to them, the 39 articles, and thus to derive the essential Anglican doctrine from the known views of the times of their compilation and revision, and also of the men who were responsible for them. Well, it's really kind of hard to say today that there are 39 articles churches. I guess there's some in England. I don't know the Church of England's situation like some men do, but I know Dr. Gerald Bray, Dr. Packer complain about the ignorance of the articles. I got a book over there that talks on the forgotten articles. I forget the guy's name, but he's trying to show they're important. We do have them in the back of the Book of Common Prayer in the 1979 book called Historical Documents. I've never heard ever an Episcopal rector or a bishop ever talk about the 39 articles. Even Reformed Episcopal Seminary didn't talk about it too much. Knew of them. It was in their 35 articles, made reference to it. But And thankfully, Reformed Episcopal published this. Well, back to Dr. Thomas says, it seemed best to keep as closely as possible to the articles as the truest expression of and best guide to Anglican theology. I wonder if that would be said today at Duke or General Seminary or Virginia Theological Seminary or Sewanee or that place out in California where one of my senior chaplains trained, Episcopal guy. He was a good guy too, that Episcopal captain. He was a gentleman's gentleman. He was kind to Sharon and I. Visited Sharon, had a couple of kids up in New London. Back to Packer on Thomas. Clearly, such a purpose excludes any quest for originality, though it does not by any means exclude the possibility that the author's powers of analysis and synthesis lead him to crystallize out of familiar material deep simplicities and simple profundities, which will strike his readers as new revelations. In fact, Griffith Thomas, brilliant teacher that he was, often achieves just this, as did an earlier church theologian of whom Thomas's compression, precision, penetration, arranging of themes, sharpness of thought, sureness of judgment is so Packerian. Polemical edge and practical aims vividly remind one, namely, John Calvin, whose Institutes of the Christian Religion also eschew originality. It achieved massive clarifications which indelibly impressed the mind. Oh boy. Dr. Thomas on a level with Calvin's Christian Institutes. I'm going to have to think about that one. Calvin has 4 books in the Christian Institutes. It's over in there somewhere, broken down edition. Need to get a new one. Maybe one day we'll read through that, God willing. I don't know. Put Thomas on that level. Well, Packer says that's what Packer thinks. Dr. Packer. When I say Packer, it's Professor Packer. Don't mean any disrespect, despite a few disagreements with him. Dr. Packer, as in general terms, Calvin's 1559 Institutes rounded off 40-year Reformation era in European theology. 40 years, but there's still reform going on. So in general terms, the principles of theology, this phone is going crazy over there. Always telemarketers. May be said to have rounded off a 400-year era of Protestant Anglicanism, and in particular to have summed up a century of vigilant scholarship, which in face of what looked like Rome's Trojan horse in the Church of England, he's referring to the Tractos, termites, had sought to vindicate historic Protestantism as authentically Anglican, as the only position with more than squatters' rights within the establishment. That's a great phrase. I've always called the Tractarians parasites. Anglo-Catholic parasites coming up with this, that, and the other, always divisive and schismatic and arrogant. And look at my clothes. Oh boy, the ornaments are rubric. Look at me. Put the Christmas lights on my hats. Well, there were men who rose to challenge those Tractos. Dr. Thomas was one. The Reformed Episcopalians was another. And there was movement within the Episcopal Church to oppose it. Charles Petit McIlvaine was one. Protestant Episcopal Reformed bishop. 4-pointer, I think. 4-point Calvinist friend of Charles Hodge. Didn't quite get it right on Tulip, but certainly was not a dogmatic illiberal. That's probably my new term for libos. Dogmatic illiberals, irrationalists with a tiny God. Anyways, Packer goes back here to show Thomas is an anti-Tractarian. This was the scholarship of such men as William Good, and he was a good Church of England man. took on the tractos. George Cornelius Gorham, T.P. Maltby, I've got one of his books up in over there too. T.S.L. Vaughan, that's a new name to me. Nathaniel Dimmick. E.A. Lytton, I got him up over in there too. Henry Wace, he was the Dean of Canterbury. Hanley C.G. Moule, another great name in Anglican scholarship. J.T. Tomlinson, W. Prescott Upton, Charles Sidney Carter, giants in the land in their own day, however little remembered now. In his preface, Thomas acknowledges a special debt to lectures on the articles by his two principals at King's College, London, by Barry and Wace, and also two books produced by members of this school of thought. The first is Lytton's Introduction to Dogmatic Theology. Have that up over and about there. 1882, 1892, third edition, 1912. Which for clearness of view, firmness of grasp, balance of statement, and forcefulness of presentation remains unsurpassed among works of Anglican dogmatics, close quote. And maybe, God willing, we'll read E.A. Lytton's work, Introduction to Dogmatic Theology. And by dogmatics, need to kind of defuse or defang that term. Well, the idea isn't dogmatic. Rather, it goes back to the Greek term dogma, teaching. The introduction to dogmatics would be introduction to teaching. So we'll kind of defuse or deflate the idea of being pushy or abusively confrontational, dogmatic. He's dogmatic. You can't talk to him. No, it's the presentation of the teachings of the church. That's the idea. The second volume is Bultney's manual entitled Commentary on the 39 Articles, forming an introduction to the theology of the Church of England. And Bultney's up in here somewhere. 1871, 5th edition, 1880. So we're dealing with a book that's 140, 150 years old. Written when my grandparents were born. When my great-grandparents were raising their families in Canada, which Thomas always cites as the theology of the Church of England, referring to Bultby. Well, okay, we're going to have to assess that in the larger panoply of systematic theology, the Articles of the Church of England, but we're not going to forget the Westminster Standards. Not going to happen. You know, you Anglicos, Piskies, I don't know, the Anglicos, you're going to want me to be a 39 Articles man. Okay, I'm there with you. But I got the 21 forms of Reformed unity. I had the 3 forms of unity with the Dutchman. Westminster Standards. Okay? We'll keep our eye on that as we go along. Anyways, we appreciate what's going on here with Packer and Thomas. We're prayer book people. Thomas's book, like Bultby's, was born in the college classroom. Bultby was the first principal of London College of Divinity. Didn't know that before. And could truly be described as an updating of Bultby at 3 times the length. The whole corpus of anti-tractarian writing stands, however, behind the principles of theology. Yay! Send a memo down to Shifty Shady in Dallas. And Jack Eicher over in Fort Worth. And Keith Ackerman, another bishop in Peoria. Or send it to the boys at the Shota House. Dr. Peter Toon, he was kind of accommodationist. He called himself an evangelical Anglican, but he never tangled with the Tractarians well, he did. He's got one volume on it. But anyways, he went up there as a visiting professor and compliments of the rector of St. John's in downtown Detroit, a cathedral church staffed by a Tractarian. I've been in his church a number of times, talked with him. Nice guy to talk with. He told me when he was a student at the Shota House, Dr. Toon was a guest professor, One of the Anglo-Catholic professors called the students together at night to pray that the demons would be exorcised from the school. It was awful having Peter Toon there. And they prayed for that, and then they sung the Te Deum Laudamus. We praise thee, O God. That God had cast out the demons from Nashotah. I was like, give me a break. Attractive parasites. Anyways, according to Packer, Thomas is fighting against the Tractarians here. Just published in 1930. He uses his stuff as his lectures at Wycliffe Hall, University of Toronto. So for my Canadian relatives, many still up in Canada, this is University of Toronto. Good Anglican man, good old Anglican man. Thomas's principles, Packer goes on, show us the stature of the tradition which he represents. It was not the narrow, negative, and fanatical thing, that narrow, negative, and fanatical acts by some Protestants sometimes made it appear as breadth, balance, learning, and great intellectual strength. Methodologically, in the way of relating scripture, reason, and the Christian past, and substantively in the account of the content of Christianity, it breathes the spirit of Cranmer, Jewell, and Hooker in a very marked way, distrusting the intellectual rigidity which it thought it saw in Calvin and the Westminster Standards. Packer, please. Intellectual rigidity. They'll call us precisions because we hold to the Westminster Standards. Guess what? 2 + 2 = 4. E = mc squared. We do scientific work. We do engineering. We do blueprints. And these guys who complain like Packer's doing here about intellectual rigidity, and yet we got a 700-page prayer book. Give me a break, Packer. Oh, I get tired of it. I've heard this so many times. I want to intellectual rigidity. Meanwhile, they're going to shuffle a 700-page book of common prayer for worship. You want to talk about rigid? It's rigid and it's regulated. But now we got to hear him whine and sniffle like a baby. Come on, Packer. I wish I was in his classroom. I'd give him a hard time. Dear brother, it'd be an academic rebuttal. It'd be unyielding. It'd be toe-to-toe. He's just praised Cranmer or Calvin's institutes, and he puts Thomas up on a level of this Calvin. Now he's sniffling like a baby. Maybe that's a little rough. 11th commandment, thou shalt not be offensive. Well, I'm an old Marine guy, so let me just backtrack a little bit. It's a little offensive. It really is. To be sniffling and whining about one of the great standards of the Reformation faith, the Westminster Standards. Anyways, let me carry on. See what Packer's got. He's got anything else to say here. Here he goes again, Packer. It rejoiced in the elbow room for mental enterprise and rethinking. Ain't gonna work, Jim. This is sad. This is where you can see me as a Reformed prayer book man, Reformed Anglican. These guys are sniffling about elbow room. What about the prayer book? There's no elbow room for the Presbyterians. You got to come in the Anglican way and do the prayer book, 700 pages. I think the Westminster Confession of Faith is 700 pages, 33 chapters. What do you complain about, you Anglicos? About the Westminster Standards? Give me a break. I've heard it for years, for decades. I'm tired of it. So I come across it here, Jimmy Packer. Jimmy, pull back. And for those who love James Packer, fine. But he's not getting away with it here. Alas, we soldier on. We love James. We love Thomas. We love the Westminster Standards. Rethinking which the broad and comparatively minimal statements of the articles allow. Oh, we have breadth of thinking with the articles. So those Westminster guys don't have those precisionists. You can tell here that Jim is not a Westminster Standards man. He is and he isn't. Depends on which day he's writing. He'll in another place talk about how they're great amplification on the 39 articles, but here he trips, breaks his leg. Back to Packer on Thomas. Thomas's expression of this attitude is typical. There is obvious danger, Thomas writes, in every attempt at systemizing Christian truth. It is far better to be content with the articles or points, quote, quote, with gaps unfilled. This method prevents teaching becoming hardened into a cast iron system which cannot expand. We'll interject here. Parable. It is the virtue of the Church of Anglican articles that they do not commit churchmen to an absolute rigid system of doctrine from which there is no relief and of which there is no modification. Close quote. Both intellectualism and anti-intellectualism are mistakes to be avoided, Packer goes on. First, in the past days, theology has been too closely limited to metaphysics, intellectualism, and philosophy. Theology is of the heart, and the deepest truths are inextricably bound up with the personal needs and experiences. The moral consciousness of the man must also find a place. As Christianity speaks to every part of our nature, so every part must take its share in the reception and expression of Christian theology. On the second, this is now Thomas talking. Modern impatience against dogma, whether on the part of the Ritschlian theologian, Thomas would surely have put radical had he been writing today, or of the man in the street, is a phrase of that practical Gnosticism which would insist that no valid knowledge of God and his truth is possible. Packer goes on, the intellectual grasp of Christianity is essential for a strong Christian life, for giving balance and force to experience, for protection against error, for equipment for service. It is possible to be thought spiritual and yet to only be emotional without intellectual clearness and power. This will inevitably produce weakness. Packer goes on, Christianity is life, that is personal communion with God in and through Jesus Christ, and an experiential redemption-oriented Christocentricity is thus the key to right theologizing. Let Thomas say it in his own way. Quote, the sole and sufficient guarantee of Christian doctrine being at once intellectual and experimental is its constant and close association with the person of Jesus Christ. In order to avoid anything dry and lifeless, we must relate every truth to the person of him who declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When it is realized that Christianity is Christ, that Christ is the substance, source, and spring of all doctrine, our theology will be truly Christian. Close quote. And as Packer goes on, such is the perspective which Thomas himself maintains throughout this and all his books. How many more pages? We're still in the preface here. Packer goes on, in terms of both motivation and method, the Protestant evangelical tradition which we are describing, whatever that kind of means, which is in fact an ecumenical thing, embracing great Presbyterian, Congregational, Baptist, Lutheran, and Methodist writers, Packer tells us, as well as Anglicans. Well, at least he's broad. Methodists, Lutherans, on certain point. Lutheranism was a curse word at Cambridge in 1600. Anyways, for the fullness of revealed truth, Catholic also. Well, there is something to be said here about the breadth, but I'm not sure I want to use the word ecumenical with some of its negative connotations, but When we look across the centuries of church history, we'll listen to truth wherever it comes from. Packer goes on, one basic conviction which its exponents constantly voiced and illustrated was that positions claimed as Catholic, capital C, were really sectarian eccentricities, not having apostolic warrant. Well, this is curious. But when Thomas wrote his Protestant exposition of basic Christianity prayer book style, he called it the Catholic faith. And I mentioned he's down in there somewhere. It's a must-read volume. It's superb handbook and designed for catechesis classes in Anglican Church where he was in England. And I wonder if it was used in the Anglican Church of Canada. That's how I grew up. I learned as the Anglican Church of Canada. Dr. Gerald Braille says Anglicanism was kind of a new term in the 19th century. It got popularized, but people of that period thought of themselves as the Church of England. He constantly makes that point. I'm not sure, other than just being a historical point, what his point is, but the Catholic faith is a volume that Thomas wrote. As for the way in which teachers within this tradition used reason and the Bible, their assertion of scriptural fundamentals were free of that naive obscurantism, sometimes labeled fundamentalist. It's kind of more of an American term. It's used rather freely towards us in the historic Reformed and historic Anglican tradition. I'll throw that out as a term of opprobrium. And their reasoning stood in sharp contrast to that rationalistic skepticism. Here I take exception with that. How about dogmatic skepticism, which often passes for rational theology today? Again, this term, Jim, you need a better term. Dogmatic irrationalists with a little God. But then maybe that's too precise. No elbow room in the Westminster Standards. Jim goes on, they proceed rather on the basis of historic Christian confidence that what biblical writers affirm is revelation, an instruction from God, and that all God's revelation viewed aright will prove to be good and glorious, internally coherent and consistent with all other known benefits and recognized values, so that a synthesis of secular and sacred learning, no such distinction obtains, everything is sacred. Those that you want to term secular, basically anti-God. Let's call it what it is. Romans 8:7, the carnal man is unable to submit to the law of God. So I wish I had Professor Packer as a professor. I didn't. Understand he could be pretty demanding and confrontational himself. One student tried to confront him on a few things, and he really got tough, grilled the guy. Well, that works two ways. The latter interpreting the former, and the former confirming the latter as a proper and practical goal. Granted, the tradition as Thomas knew it was stronger on grace than on nature, and on the given realities of supernatural salvation than on the ontological and epistemological problems that are bound up with them. And Thomas's textbook reflects this. But the clear and insistent way in which writers of this school, to a man, center on the Christ and redemption set forth in the New Testament is magnificent. I, for one of an increasing number, I'm glad to say, find this tradition to be truly founded, true in substance all along the line, as far as it goes, internal differences of detail appearing unimportant, and needing only to be undergirded, developed, and reapplied at some points to give us just that guidance in grasping God's truth that we currently need. I might insert here that the Canadian Anglican bishop out in British Columbia excommunicated Dr. Packer. How's that for Anglican charity? We little bumper sticker, we welcome all. Yeah. Oh, unless you're a classicist. Hey, discipline them. A few more minutes here. Therefore, in the face of this Athenianism of theology today, with its feverish lust for new directions and its endless speculative flounderings, Graf Bellhaus, oh my, that's a forest in and unto itself. Speculative flounderings. Nice word, Jim. I like it. It is to me a great privilege to be allowed to commend this new edition of Griffith Thomas's Theological Rock of Gibraltar. Magnificent, Jim. Love it. Theological Rock of Gibraltar. Remember the Royal Navy chaplain, Britt? Nice guy. Sitting there, I'm a young guy. He's older than I was. A decade or two. What about the 39 articles of Church of England? I was just a young puppy. It was irrelevant. Jim and Thomas would disagree. The Theological Rock of Gibraltar. Of course, we had the Westminster Standards as Precisians. Well, they have their Precisian Book of Common Prayer. We keep both. How many folk now tossed to and fro by the conflicting winds of doctrine will be drawn to cast anchor here remains to be seen. But it can be said at once that it will be a great gain for the church if many do. I think we should end there. We'll pick it up next time. Think along with Professor Packer and Professor W.H. Griffith Thomas on the principles of theology and introduction to the 39 articles of the Church of England. You may have other thoughts, agreements, disagreements. It's okay. Put them in the notes if you want. We'll just soldier on, walk along with the professors. Even though the books are dated, good works are not dated. These are good thoughts that we're getting. There's some disagreements here and there. That's fine. We're Christian churchmen. So with that, let us close with a prayer that I often use in closing for these sessions from the Book of Common Prayer. Let's pray. Oh Lord, you've given us grace at this time, with one accord, some disagreements, to make our common supplications unto thee. And you've promised that where two or three are gathered in your name, we're in a majority because you're here with us. Your presence is with us. And not as some, that guy down in Dallas says that your real absence. He falsely imputes that to us, but you're present. You've been with us since the womb. You've been with us day and night through our lives, through these decades. You're present with us now. So grant to us and to thy servants the fulfillment of their petitions as is most expedient for them, granting all of us in this world knowledge of thy truth, and in the world to come, life everlasting. Amen. Well, we'll pick up with session 2 next time. This is systematic theology. 39 articles of the Church of England, without forgetting the Westminster Standards or the other great forms of unity, which kind of give us elbow room. Jim thinks it's too rigid. Anyways, we got to have a good laugh. Grandma Tonkin said, you got to laugh a little. No kidding. Anyways, Godspeed.